Boar and grizzly bear attacks, though rare, have become a chilling topic of concern in regions where these powerful wild animals roam. Both are known for their strength and aggression, especially when threatened, but their behaviors and habitats differ. Wild boars, with their sharp tusks and unpredictable nature, are more commonly encountered in forests and rural areas, while grizzly bears, significantly larger and stronger, dominate remote wilderness regions. Understanding the behavior of these animals and knowing how to stay safe in their territory is crucial for hikers, campers, and anyone venturing into their domains. Here are 6 stories. The dark forest was no stranger to legends. Tales of shadowy figures lurking in the fog, beasts that moved like ghosts through the trees, and creatures that refused to die. Marcus Steiner had heard them all, but he wasn't the type to entertain fairy tales. He was a hunter, born into a family of hunters, and he knew that in the end, steel and powder ruled the wild. It was the winter of 1998, and the boar hunting season was in full swing. Snow lay thick on the ground, muffling footsteps and making tracking almost effortless. But the mist, thick, suffocating, hung low in the valleys of the dark forest, making visibility a nightmare. Marcus adjusted the strap of his Mauser 98 rifle and wiped the frost from his mustache. He was alone today, having ventured out early before the rest of the group. That was his way. Hunting was personal. The morning had started well. He had woken up before dawn in his small hunting cabin, deep in the woods where he had spent every winter since he was a boy. The cabin was old, built by his grandfather, a hunter himself, who had passed down his knowledge of the forest. Marcus had spent the early hours preparing his gear, checking his rifle, sharpening his hunting knife, and ensuring his flask was filled with strong coffee to ward off the morning chill. His attire was practical: a thick wool coat, insulated gloves, and sturdy boots designed for deep snow. He knew the importance of staying warm, especially in the unforgiving winters of the forest. The tracks were fresh. Large, deep imprints led from the undergrowth towards the stream. This was no ordinary boar. Marcus could tell from the spread of the prints and the weight pressed into the snow. This was a giant. His pulse quickened. A trophy like this didn't come often. Slowly, he chambered around and moved forward, every step measured and silent. A guttural grunt echoed through the trees. Marcus stopped, eyes scanning the mist. The boar was close. He knelt by a tree, rifle raised, waiting for the beast to step into view. Then he saw it. It was monstrous. A mass of muscle and bristle, its dark fur matted with mud and ice. Its breath came in steaming huffs, nostrils flaring. Marcus had taken down dozens of boars before, but something about this one made his fingers tighten around the rifle. It stood unnaturally still, its small eyes locked on him, unblinking. Marcus didn't hesitate. He had the shot. He squeezed the trigger. The crack of the Mauser split the silence. The bullet hit true, slamming into the boar's shoulder. Any other beast would have gone down, but not this one. It staggered, shook itself, and then charged. Marcus barely had time to react. He pulled the bolt back to chamber another round, but the rifle jammed. A cold spike of panic shot through him. The boar was coming fast, its tusk gleaming. Marcus tried to move, but the snow betrayed him, his boots slipping just enough to cost him precious seconds. The impact sent him flying backward. He landed hard, pain lancing up his side. Before he could recover, the beast was on him. Razor-sharp tusks slashed through his pant leg, tearing flesh. Marcus roared in pain, reaching for the hunting knife strapped to his belt. The boar reared back for another strike, and with a desperate effort, he drove the blade into its thick hide. The boar shrieked, twisting violently. Marcus held on, gripping the knife handle as the beast thrashed. Blood, hot and steaming, spattered onto the snow. He wrenched the knife free and stabbed again, this time under the thick folds of skin near its throat. The boar faltered, It took a staggering step backward, grunting, its breath ragged. Then, without warning, it turned and bolted into the fog, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. Marcus lay panting, his leg throbbing, his breath clouding the freezing air. He pushed himself up, his body trembling with adrenaline and pain. The snow beneath him was soaked with blood, his and the boar's. He pressed a hand to his leg, feeling the deep gashes. He had survived, but just barely. When he limped back to the cabin that night, the other hunters listened in silence as he recounted what had happened. Some nodded in understanding, others cast wary glances toward the mist outside. Marcus knew what they were thinking. In the dark forest, there were things that didn't die easily, and some that never died at all. The night after the attack, Marcus lay in his bed, the pain in his leg throbbing with every heartbeat. Sleep refused to come. His mind kept replaying the encounter, the moment his bullet had failed, the charge, and the glint of the tusks. He had hunted boars his whole life, and never had he seen one behave like that. By morning, he had made up his mind. He would track the boar again. He had left blood in the snow. It was wounded. No animal could survive an injury like that for long. He would finish what he started. The second hunt was harder. The boar's trail led him deeper into the forest, into parts he rarely ventured. The fog seemed thicker here, the trees more ancient, their twisted roots breaking through the icy ground like gnarled fingers. He followed the trail for hours, his breath coming in steady clouds. Then he found it, or what was left of it. The boar lay in a clearing, its massive body motionless, but it wasn't the bullet that had killed it. Something had torn into its flesh, deep gashes running along its side, far larger than anything a wolf or lynx could make. Marcus frowned. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the forest itself had decided to claim the beast. A chill ran down his spine. He had never been a superstitious man, but something about this scene felt wrong. He turned, glancing into the mist that clung to the trees like a living thing. He was being watched. He could feel it. Marcus didn't wait to find out by what. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and made his way back, his limp worse than before. When he reached his cabin, he packed his things, doused the fire, and locked the door. He never hunted that part of the forest again. The dense pine forests of northern Maine were silent in late autumn, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant crack of branches. The air carried the sharp scent of damp earth, fallen foliage, and the lingering bite of frost. It was the perfect setting for a white-tailed deer hunt, quiet, secluded, and teeming with game. Ben Caldwell had been hunting these woods since he was 16. Now, in his late 30s, he was as comfortable in the wilderness as he was in his own home. He knew the signs, the sounds, and the patterns of the deer that moved through this part of the state. He had a buck tag to fill and was determined to bring home a trophy before the season closed. He moved carefully through the underbrush, his .270 Winchester slung across his shoulder. The rifle was old but reliable, its walnut stock worn smooth from years of use. His boots barely made a sound on the forest floor, the soft layers of fallen pine needles absorbing his steps. A crisp breeze stirred the branches overhead, sending golden and red leaves tumbling down like quiet confetti. The world felt still, untouched, almost sacred. Then he noticed something off. At first it was just a prickling at the back of his neck, a hunter's instinct, the kind of feeling that had saved his hide more than once when tracking in unknown terrain. He wasn't alone. He paused, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, just the wind playing tricks. Shaking off the unease, he pressed on, spotting fresh deer tracks leading toward a small ravine. He followed them, rifle at the ready, heart pounding with the excitement of the chase. A buck had passed through here not long ago. He crouched near the tracks, fingers tracing the indentations. Still soft, maybe an hour old at most. He was close. That's when he heard it. A low, guttural growl, deep, resonant, and unmistakably close. Ben's breath caught in his throat. He turned slowly, scanning the undergrowth. The sound had come from his left. He lifted his rifle, safety off, his muscles tense. Black bears weren't uncommon in Maine, but they usually avoided humans. And they certainly didn't stalk them. For the first time in years, fear curled in his gut. He had been followed. How long? A mile? More? He listened, straining his ears over the hammering of his own pulse. A shadow shifted in the thickets. Then came the unmistakable crunch of something heavy moving closer. The bear was big, bigger than any he'd seen before. Its dark shape blended with the trees, a living shadow stalking him through the fading light. Ben raised his rifle, the crosshair settling on the creature's shoulder. One clean shot would stop it. He exhaled slowly, steadying his aim. The bear moved, fast. Before he could fire, it lunged from the underbrush, closing the distance in an instant. Ben barely had time to react. He fired, the shot echoing through the trees. The bullet struck, but the bear barely staggered. It roared, a sound that rattled his bones, and charged again. Years of hunting instinct took over. He turned and bolted, sprinting through the woods as fast as his legs could carry him. He needed high ground, a way to slow the beast down. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. Then he saw it, a tree, thick and sturdy, its lower branches just within reach. He leapt, fingers clawing at the rough bark, legs scrambling for purchase. The bear hit the trunk just as he pulled himself up, its claws raking the wood inches from his boots. It growled again, pacing below, tearing into the tree in frustration. Ben clung to a thick branch, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had climbed fast, but the bear wasn't giving up. It circled, growling, swiping at the air as if daring him to come down. His rifle was slung across his back, useless in such close quarters. Minutes passed, and then an hour. The bear didn't leave. It sat beneath the tree watching him, waiting. The sun began to set, and the temperature dropped. Ben's fingers stiffened in the cold. He shifted carefully, careful not to lose his balance. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear stood, sniffed the air, and turned away. It lumbered back into the forest, vanishing into the shadows like a nightmare retreating before dawn. Ben didn't move for a long time. He listened, straining for any sign that it was still near. Only when he was sure it was gone did he ease himself down, his boots crunching softly against the ground. His pack was shredded. The bear had torn through it, scattering his supplies. He picked up his rifle, checked the chamber, and exhaled shakily. He had never been hunted before. The forest had always been his domain, his place of control. But that day he learned a different truth. Sometimes in the wild, he became the one being hunted. Ben never hunted that part of the woods again. As he made his way back to his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had faced animals before, moose that wouldn't go down, coyotes that had come too close for comfort, but never had he felt like prey. The drive home was long and silent, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. His wife asked what was wrong when he walked through the door, but he only shook his head. That night, he dreamed of dark shapes in the woods, of eyes watching him from the undergrowth. He woke with a start, his body drenched in sweat. He swore he could still hear the growl echoing in his ears. The next morning, he did something he had never done before. He packed away his hunting gear, placing his rifle back into its case. He would hunt again, of course, hunting was in his blood, but not in those woods. Not ever again. Months later, he heard rumors from other hunters, stories of a massive black bear that seemed almost fearless, a creature that didn't flee at the sound of gunfire, that watched from the trees like it was studying its prey. Some dismissed it as just another tall tale, But Ben knew better. He had seen it. He had been its prey, and he wasn't about to tempt fate a second time. The Yukon wilderness was an unforgiving place, especially in the dead of winter. The year was 1987, and Jack Morrison knew better than to take it lightly. He had spent decades trapping and hunting in these remote lands where the temperature often plummeted to negative 30 degrees Celsius, and a single mistake could mean the difference between survival and death. Jack had set out early that morning, his sled dogs eager as they pulled him deeper into the snow-covered wilderness. The land stretched endlessly before him, rolling hills of untouched white, broken only by the occasional black sprout of spruce trees. He was after caribou, a vital hunt that would keep his food supply strong through the worst of the season. He carried his trusted .36 bolt-action rifle slung across his back, a weapon that had never failed him, and wore thick layers of wool and fur to stave off the biting cold. The first sign of trouble came in the form of the wind. It picked up suddenly, howling through the valley like a living thing. The sky, once a crisp, cloudless blue, had begun to darken with an ominous shade of gray. Jack frowned. A storm was coming. He considered turning back, but then he spotted them. Fresh tracks in the snow. Caribou. And not old ones either. His gut told him they were close. He was experienced enough to know he had a small window before the storm hit. If he was quick, he could take his shot and be back at camp before it got too bad. He signaled his dogs to slow and stepped off the sled, moving carefully through the powdery snow. His breath came in thick clouds as he followed the tracks, his rifle ready. Then, just ahead, he saw them, a small herd moving between the trees. Perfect. Jack braced himself, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed through the valley. The caribou scattered, but one of them stumbled, its legs folding beneath it. A clean shot. Jack exhaled, satisfied. He approached quickly, knife in hand, ready to field dress the animal and load it onto his sled. He was already calculating the time it would take to get back to camp. Then the wind roared and the world disappeared. The whiteout hit like a wall. Within seconds, everything was consumed by swirling snow. Jack couldn't see 10 feet in front of him. The wind screamed in his ears, drowning out every sound but its own fury. He turned, squinting against the blinding storm. His sled and his dogs were gone. Panic threatened to creep in, but he shoved it down. He had been in bad situations before. He knew the rules: don't run, don't waste energy, don't make rash decisions. He had to think. He pulled his compass from his pocket, but the needle spun uselessly. The storm had created a static charge in the air, messing with the instrument. He cursed under his breath. If he couldn't navigate by compass, he'd have to rely on instinct and memory. Jack moved carefully, retracing his steps. He called for his dogs, his voice swallowed instantly by the wind. His boots sank into the deep snow with every step. He knew he couldn't afford to wander aimlessly. If he didn't find shelter soon, hypothermia would set in. The hours stretched on. The cold seeped through his layers, biting into his skin. He could feel the numbness creeping into his fingers, the warning signs of frostbite. He needed to act fast. Through the swirling white, he spotted it, a faint shadow. It was a small ridge, where the wind had carved a natural depression in the snow. It wasn't much, but it offered some shelter. Without hesitation, Jack dropped to his knees and began digging, using his hands and knife to carve out a snow cave. His grandfather had taught him this trick long ago, how snow, for all its cold, could also insulate. He worked until his muscles ached, then crawled inside, curling up as tightly as he could. He pulled his coat tighter, tucked his hands beneath his arms, and focused on breathing slow, steady breaths. The storm raged on outside, but in the tiny space of his cave there was a measure of warmth. He willed himself to stay awake. Sleeping in this cold could be deadly. He counted the seconds, then the minutes, fighting the exhaustion that clawed at him. At some point, he must have dozed off. When he woke, the storm had quieted. The silence was eerie, almost deafening after so many hours of wind howling in his ears. He crawled out of the snow cave, blinking at the blinding white landscape. The storm had erased everything. His tracks, his bearings, everything familiar, but he wasn't dead. And as long as he was breathing, he could find his way back. Then he heard it, the faint, distant howls of his dogs. Hope surged through him. He followed the sound, pushing through the snow, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. And then, finally, he saw them. His sled dogs had waited for him, their tails wagging, eyes bright with recognition. Relief crashed over him like a wave. He staggered to them, running a gloved hand over each one, murmuring words of gratitude. They had stayed, drawn by the faint scent of his fire-starting kit he had left in his sled. Jack wasted no time. He climbed onto the sled, cracked the reins, and urged his team forward. The ride back to camp felt like a dream. His body numb, his mind replaying every moment of the storm. When he finally reached the safety of his cabin, he barely had the strength to light the fire. He sat before the flames, letting the heat seep back into his bones. He had faced the Yukon and lived. The next morning, he looked out over the frozen landscape, the storm long gone. He had his caribou, he had his dogs, and he had his life. Some men would have taken that experience as a warning to leave the wild behind. But Jack Morrison was not like most men. The Yukon had tested him, and he had proven he was still worthy of it. He spent the next few days recuperating, his body aching from the ordeal. He checked his gear, ensuring that next time he would be better prepared for the unexpected. Despite the danger, he felt a renewed respect for the land that had nearly claimed him. The Yukon was not a place for the weak. It demanded resilience, intelligence, and respect. Jack had known this since his youth, but now it was burned into him deeper than ever. As he sipped his coffee by the fire, he thought about the next hunt, the next journey into the wilderness. Because no matter how close he had come to the edge, he knew one thing for certain. He would always return. The Montana backcountry was a land of rugged beauty. Rolling hills covered in golden aspen, towering pines stretching toward the sky, and deep valleys carved by ancient rivers. It was late September 2005, prime elk season, and Todd Reynolds was exactly where he wanted to be. A seasoned hunter, Todd had spent his whole life in these mountains, learning their secrets from his father and grandfather before him. He knew how to read the wind, how to track a wounded animal, and, most importantly, how to respect the land. This trip he was hunting solo, something he preferred. The stillness, the quiet. He lived for it. His rifle, a well-maintained .300 Winchester Magnum, rested comfortably in his hands as he moved through the forest, his steps careful and deliberate. He had been tracking a massive bull elk since dawn, following fresh droppings and deep hoof prints pressed into the soft earth. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and distant snow, and the occasional bugle of a bull echoed through the valleys. By noon, Todd had covered several miles, each step bringing him closer to his target. He paused at a clearing, crouching behind a fallen log as he raised his binoculars. Then he saw it. The bull was enormous, at least 800 pounds, its antlers a towering crown of jagged tines. It stood at the edge of a meadow, nostrils flaring and muscles rippling beneath its dark hide. Todd's heart pounded. This was the kind of elk that hunters dreamed of. He took a deep breath, steadying his aim. The distance was good, about 200 yards. He lined up the shot, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, sending birds scattering from the trees. The bullet struck true, hitting the elk just behind the shoulder. A perfect shot. But the elk didn't go down. Instead, it let out a deep guttural bellow and turned, straight toward Todd. He barely had time to react before the massive animal charged, its hooves thundering against the ground like rolling thunder. Todd scrambled to cycle another round into the chamber, but the elk was too fast. In a split second, instinct took over. He threw himself backward, rolling behind the log just as the elk crashed into it with the force of a freight train. The impact shook the ground, splinters flying as the animal bellowed again, furious and wild. Todd hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his ribs. His rifle had been knocked from his hands, lying just out of reach. He barely had time to process before the elk reared up, its massive hooves slamming down inches from his head. Desperate, Todd grabbed his hunting knife from his belt. As the elk lunged again, he rolled to the side, slashing blindly at its flank. The blade found flesh, and the bull let out a furious scream, stumbling back just enough for Todd to scramble away. His rifle. He needed his rifle. Ignoring the pain in his ribs, he dove for it, snatching it up just as the elk charged again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He brought the rifle up, aimed for the chest, and fired. The elk stumbled mid-stride, crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust and torn grass. It kicked once, twice, then went still. Todd lay there for several minutes, chest heaving, sweat freezing against his skin. His ribs ached, his hands shook, but he was alive. When he finally got to his feet, he approached the elk cautiously, half expecting it to rise again. It didn't. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. He had taken down plenty of game before, but never had one fought back like this. Hours later, as he finished field dressing the bull, he looked out over the mountains, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of fire and gold. The wilderness had reminded him of something that day. No matter how skilled a hunter was, out here the rules could change in an instant, and even the mightiest could still be humbled by the wild. Todd spent the next few hours working carefully, methodically field dressing the elk. He had to be efficient. Bears weren't uncommon in this area, and the scent of blood would travel fast. He worked in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the forest, his breath visible in the cool evening air. His ribs ached with every movement, but he pushed through it, knowing he had no other choice. As he finished, he stood and stretched, wincing as pain flared up in his side. He had a long haul ahead of him. He secured the quarters of meat and the antlers, making sure everything was properly loaded onto his pack frame. It would take multiple trips to get everything back to his truck, but that was part of the process. The first trip was slow. The weight of the meat pressed down on his shoulders, each step measured as he navigated the rugged terrain. The sun had almost fully set, casting long shadows between the trees. The forest felt different now, quieter, more watchful. Todd had been in these woods countless times, but after what had happened today, something about them felt changed. He finally reached his truck, locked up the first load, and took a long drink from his water bottle. His body was screaming for rest, but he wasn't about to leave the rest of the elk overnight. He'd heard too many stories of hunters returning to find their kill stripped clean by scavengers. On the way back up the ridge, he kept his rifle close, every rustling branch making his pulse spike. His mind kept replaying the charge, the sheer force of the elk's attack. He had always respected these animals, but this was something different. This bull had fought like it knew it was fighting for its life. By the time he had the last of the meat packed away in his truck, it was close to midnight. Todd was exhausted, every muscle burning, but he felt something else too, something deep in his gut. Respect. Back at camp, he built a small fire, sitting close as he stretched his sore limbs. He thought about his father and grandfather, about the stories they used to tell. He understood them better now. The land wasn't just something to be conquered. It was something that fought back, something that reminded you in the most brutal ways that you were only borrowing space in its vast, untamed kingdom. The next morning, as he drove out of the mountains, he took one last look at the ridgeline where it had all happened. He knew he'd be back next season because the wilderness wasn't just a place he visited. It was a part of him, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The Blackthorn Wilds was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. Dense forests of gnarled oaks, sprawling meadows tangled with razor grass, and shadowed ravines where few dared to tread. It was late October, and Daniel Whitaker was exactly where he wanted to be. A seasoned outdoorsman, Daniel had spent his life tracking game through the toughest terrain. He knew these woods better than most, having studied every ridge and creek since he was a boy. This trip, however, wasn't about tradition or sport. It was about food. He needed meat to last through the winter, and the wild boars that roamed these lands would provide exactly that. His weapon of choice was a well-worn Marlin 1895 lever-action rifle, chambered in .45-70 slung securely over his shoulder. He also carried a heavy-bladed Bowie knife on his belt, a necessity for field dressing and, if things went sideways, self-defense. Boars weren't just tough, they were aggressive and unpredictable, and Daniel knew that better than most. By noon, he had tracked a sounder through the muddy banks of the Roaring Fox River, their hoofprints pressed deep into the wet soil. The largest among them, a monstrous boar with jagged tusks and a dark, bristled hide, had broken off from the group. Daniel followed, keeping his steps slow, deliberate, careful not to break the eerie silence of the woods. He spotted the boar just beyond a stand of deadfall, its bulk shifting through the underbrush as it rooted for food. The shot was good, maybe 70 yards. He raised the rifle, steadied his breath, and fired. The crack of the gun echoed, and the boar jolted. But it didn't go down. Instead, it turned, nostrils flaring, eyes locking onto Daniel with a feral intensity. Then it charged. Daniel barely had time to cycle another round before the beast was on him. He stumbled back, yanking his rifle up, but the boar barreled into him like a battering ram. The force knocked the wind from his lungs, sent him sprawling into the damp earth. Pain exploded through his ribs as he rolled, barely avoiding the slashing arc of the boar's tusks. His rifle was gone, knocked from his hands in the chaos. He reached for his knife, but before he could draw it, the boar lunged again, its massive head swinging low. He threw himself to the side, feeling the hot breath of the beast as it missed him by inches. Desperation clawed at his mind. He needed a weapon, fast. Scrambling to his feet, he ran, zigzagging between the trees, dodging low-hanging branches, trying to put something between him and the beast. The boar thundered after him, relentless, gaining ground with every second. Then he saw it, his rifle half buried in the mud near a fallen log. He veered toward it, diving just as the boar crashed into his legs. Fire shot through his body as he hit the ground hard. The world spun. The beast was on him, hooves kicking up dirt, tusks raking dangerously close. With a snarl, Daniel ripped his knife free. As the boar lunged, he twisted, driving the blade deep into its flank. The beast shrieked, rearing back, momentarily stunned. That was all he needed. He lunged for his rifle, fingers curling around the stock. Rolling onto his back, he brought the barrel up just as the boar charged again. Boom. The shot was deafening at close range. The bullet slammed into the beast's chest, dropping it mid-stride. It collapsed in a heap, twitching, snarling, fighting even in death. Then, finally, it went still. Daniel lay there, chest heaving, sweat chilling against his skin. His ribs ached, his hands trembled, but he was alive. When he finally rose, he approached the boar cautiously, knife still ready. But it was over. Hours later, as he finished field dressing the animal, he looked around the silent forest. The land had tested him, forced him to the edge, and he had fought back. As he strapped the first load of meat to his pack, he knew one thing for certain. He would never underestimate the wild again. The weight of the boar's carcass pressed heavily against his shoulders as he trudged through the underbrush, each step measured to avoid slipping on the damp forest floor. The scent of blood hung thick in the air, and Daniel knew he wasn't alone. The Blackthorn Wilds had its own hierarchy, and a fresh kill was an open invitation for the scavengers and predators lurking in the shadows. Coyotes, mountain lions, even the occasional black bear. They all had their eyes on the prize. He needed to move fast. Nightfall crept over the forest like ink spilling across a canvas, swallowing the last traces of daylight. Daniel had hoped to reach his truck before dark, but the fight had cost him precious time. He was still miles away, and the dense trees now felt like a cage closing in around him. His breath came in steady bursts, his ears tuned to every rustle in the foliage. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every branch swayed just a little too much. He tightened his grip on his rifle, ready for anything. Halfway through the journey, he heard it, a low, guttural growl somewhere in the distance. His stomach twisted. Something was following him. He stopped, straining his ears, but the forest was silent again. Too silent. The usual symphony of crickets and distant owl calls had vanished, replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. That was never a good sign. He pressed on, his steps quickening despite the weight on his back. The growl came again, closer this time. Then the underbrush exploded with movement. A dark shape burst forward. A second boar, nearly as massive as the first. Daniel barely had time to raise his rifle before it charged, its red-rimmed eyes burning with rage. Instinct took over. He fired, the blast illuminating the darkness for a split second. The boar stumbled but didn't fall. Daniel cursed, cycling the lever action as fast as he could. The beast kept coming, blood spraying from its wound, adrenaline fueling its final attack. With no time to aim, he fired again. This time the bullet tore through its skull and the creature collapsed in a heap. Panting, Daniel stood over the fallen beast, his heart hammering. The Blackthorn Wilds had tested him once more. He had survived again. But he knew one thing for certain. The wild would always fight back, and next time it might not be so forgiving. The dense oak forests of East Texas were alive with sound that spring morning in 1994. Birds called from the treetops, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote let out a lonely yip. The humid air clung to Dale Turner's skin as he made his way down a narrow game trail. His 12-gauge Remington 870 held ready. Dale had been hunting feral hogs since he was a teenager, and at 42, he considered himself an expert on the subject. Hogs were tough, unpredictable, and invasive, tearing up farmland and competing with native wildlife. Texas had a never-ending supply of them, and Dale had no problem thinning the population. Over the years, he had developed a deep respect for these animals. They weren't just mindless pests, they were survivors, intelligent and relentless. That morning, he was hunting alone, his truck parked a few miles back near an old logging road. He preferred it that way. No distractions, no noise, just him, the woods, and the hunt. He had seen plenty of fresh sign, tracks, overturned soil where the hogs had rooted for food. He knew they were close. Then he saw it. Near a creek bed, half hidden by a tangle of brush, stood the biggest boar he had ever laid eyes on. It was a monster, easily pushing 300 pounds, its thick hide covered in mud and scars from past fights. Its tusks were long and yellowed, curving out from its massive snout. Dale had taken down a lot of hogs in his time, but this was a different beast entirely. It looked like it had been through hell and come out meaner for it. He raised his shotgun, exhaled, and fired. The blast echoed through the trees, sending a shockwave of birds into the air. Buckshot peppered the hog's side, but it didn't go down. Instead, it turned and charged. Dale had seen hogs run before, but never like this. It came at him like a freight train, its thick hooves tearing up the ground. He racked another shell into the chamber and fired again. The second shot hit, but the boar barely flinched. Time slowed. Dale had a split second to decide, run or stand his ground. He chose the latter. As the boar closed the distance, he threw himself sideways, rolling through the underbrush. The beast barreled past where he had stood, slamming head first into a tree with a sickening crack. But it wasn't dead. It staggered, shaking its massive head, snorting like a demon. Dale scrambled to his feet, knife in hand, his last resort. The shotgun was empty, no time to reload. His heart pounded as he backed up, knowing he had only seconds before the beast made another move. The boar lunged again. Dale sidestepped, swinging his blade downward, catching the thick hide just behind its shoulder. The blade bit deep, but the boar kept coming, knocking him off balance. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting up his side. Before the hog could gore him, Dale drove the knife in again, this time under its throat. He felt the hot rush of blood as the blade cut deep. The boar let out a final, shuddering grunt and collapsed, its massive body kicking up dirt as it fell. Dale lay there, gasping, his heart hammering like a drum. His hands shook as he pushed himself up, staring at the beast that had nearly killed him. Blood soaked into the earth, the humid air thick with the scent of sweat and gunpowder. After a few minutes, he forced himself to stand. His body ached from the impact, his ribs likely bruised from the fall. He wiped the sweat and dirt from his face, staring at the boar's massive frame. This was the toughest hog he had ever faced, one that seemed almost impossible to bring down. Some hogs were easy to take down, and some just refused to die easily. Dale never hunted alone again.